We've all heard the stories, right? A really great boss, someone you respect, and then something just snaps. They become a total nightmare. It happens way more than you'd think. So what's really going on there? What's the switch that flips? Well, today, we're going to dig into the research to find out what hidden triggers can push a good manager right over the edge. And here's the thing that's kind of wild. Researchers have been all over this for decades, so why is it still such a mystery in most workplaces? Well, it boils down to this thing called the Great Divide. There's this massive gap between all the brilliant stuff happening in academic research and what managers are actually doing day to day. The answers are out there for sure, but they get lost in translation. And all that lost knowledge, it creates a problem that experts have a name for: research debris. Just picture it. All these incredible game-changing studies on leadership, psychology, you name it, the very insights that could stop toxic workplaces before they even start, they're just floating out there like space junk. Unused, untranslated, and having zero impact. That's the debris. So what if we could go on a little rescue mission? What if we could grab some of that debris and use it to solve this really specific, really painful problem of the abusive supervisor? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're pulling together findings from 3 key studies to piece together a real, usable answer to that big question: why do good bosses go bad? Okay, so first, let's just quickly get our heads around why this research debris is even a thing. It really comes down to 2 totally separate worlds, 2 different ways of thinking. And you can see the disconnect right here. On one side, you've got academics. Their world is all about rigor, theory. It can take years to get a study published. But practitioners, the managers on the ground, they need answers like yesterday. Their logic is about what works right now. The incentives, the timescales, the jargon, they're speaking completely different languages. And that massive gap, that's where all this amazing research just falls right through the cracks. And the research on my bosses become abusive is a perfect example of this debris. So let's do it. Let's grab that research, pull it out of orbit, and see what it actually has to say. Okay, so here's the first really big takeaway when you piece all this research together. It turns out there isn't just one reason why this happens. It's not a single story. The evidence points to 2 very distinct, very different pathways that can lead a manager down the road to becoming abusive. All right, let's break these down. We're going to call them the internal path and the external path. The internal one is all about what's going on inside a manager's head, their psychology. And the external one, that's all about the pressures coming from the job itself. So that internal path, that's really driven by a manager's mindset. And a big piece of it is social comparison, that habit of constantly measuring yourself against others. The external path, on the other hand, is about how they react to stressful stuff at work. We're talking about affective events, things like getting conflicting orders from above, or just feeling totally lost in your role. Okay, let's follow that internal path for a second. It all starts with a supervisor who has a really high tendency to compare themselves to other people. Now, when that happens, they hit a fork in the road. They can go down one of 2 roads. Route 1 is rumination. They get stuck just dwelling on all the negative feelings, and that just totally drains their self-control. And boom, that can lead straight to abusive behavior. But Route 2 is reflection. They actively analyze that comparison and think, okay, how can I use this to get better? And incredibly, that path actually reduces the chance of abuse. Same trigger, 2 totally different endings. Now, the external path is much more of a straight line, almost like a domino effect. Step 1, a manager is dealing with major work stressors. Maybe their role is super unclear or they're getting conflicting demands. Step 2, this naturally creates a ton of frustration. And step 3, if they don't have a way to process that frustration, it just spills over. It comes out as hostile behavior aimed at their team. But, and this is the really cool and hopeful part of the research, neither of these paths has to end in abuse. It's not inevitable. The studies also found that there are some really powerful brakes that can be applied to stop this whole negative cycle in its tracks. So, the big question is it inevitable? If a manager is prone to ruminating or if they're super frustrated at work, are they just doomed to become a bad boss? Nope, not at all. And the research is super clear about this. It turns out that things in the work environment, the context, and even the supervisor's own personality can act like powerful brakes on this whole process. So let's talk about the brakes for that internal path. A huge one is the company's ethical climate. Just look at this chart. When you have a weak ethical climate, a manager who's ruminating is highly likely to become abusive. But look at the difference when you have a strong ethical climate. That same tendency just plummets. The culture itself acts like a guardrail, keeping that behavior in check. And what about the brakes for that external path? The one driven by frustration? Well, here personality really matters. Specifically, a trait called conscientiousness. A supervisor who is highly conscientious, they're diligent, principled, they have good self-control. They are much, much less likely to let their frustrations spill over into abuse. But a manager who's low on that trait, maybe more impulsive, they're far more likely to react to that frustration with hostility. All right, so we've rescued all this incredible knowledge from the debris pile. We've got the two paths, we've got the brakes. Now comes the most important part. How do we actually use this? How do we turn it into action so it doesn't just become more debris? It all comes down to building bridges across that divide we talked about. And there are a few really smart ways to do this. Things like deep partnering, where researchers and companies team up for the long haul, or using knowledge brokers. Think of great HR professionals who can act as translators, connecting the academic findings to what the business actually needs. It's about getting managers involved from the get-go and framing the insights in a way they can actually use. So what does this actually look like on the ground? Well, to deal with that toxic social comparison, maybe you get rid of individual leaderboards and focus on team huddles instead. To break that rumination cycle, you could introduce short, simple mindfulness exercises for managers. To build a strong ethical climate, you can use things like anonymous feedback systems. See? These aren't just vague theories, they are concrete, practical steps that organizations can take. And that really brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with. Take a look at your own organization. Is it actively building these kinds of bridges? Is it trying to put this kind of knowledge to work? Or is it just creating more debris?